information about Stephanie Goldstein, who is our facilitator today. Stephanie has worked as a social worker in healthcare for over 15 years. She graduated from Salisbury State University with a degree in social work. Stephanie has worked in various settings and in various capacities, ranging from mental health to aging. For over 15 years, she has spent her time focusing on the aging population. She currently works as a geriatric care manager in the Towson, Maryland area. She has also guest lectured at Johns Hopkins University and is developing educational programs for healthy aging at local community colleges. Her goals have always been to inform and educate residents and families on options and promote self-determination. Please help me welcome Stephanie Goldstein.
Thank you so much for that warm welcome, Darlene. I'm excited to be here for our Cruising Through Caregiving virtual book club for dementia caregivers this week, filling in for Jen, so I appreciate that. Our focus in this 7th week is talking about avoiding the Martyr syndrome. We're going to talk about what that means, what that word means, and how you can detect it in either yourself or another crew member of your caregiving team. We'll also go over and do an exercise to help identify that in yourself. And we'll talk about ways to remedy the situation so that you can course correct if you find yourself in this caregiver martyr syndrome. Of course, first, I want to take a minute just to thank our sponsors, Hilarity for Charity and Oasis Senior Advisors. Thank you both for your ongoing support of our virtual book club of Cruising Through Caregiving. We'll hear from both of them in a little bit, but I encourage anybody who hasn't yet visited these websites to do so, as they're tremendous assets to our caregiving community. So my opening question for you today is, are you a totally selfless caregiver? Now, we know by nature that caregivers are very generous and they do a lot for the person they're caring for. But a point to make and a question to ask is, are you doing anything to take care of yourself? Are you prioritizing yourself in any way? So we do have a question that we can go ahead and you can ask yourself if you fall into one of these categories. Are you A, totally selfless person as a caregiver? Are you B, a mostly selfless caregiver? Are you C, sometimes selfless or sometimes selfish as a caregiver? Or D, neither selfish or selfless? Now, sometimes people are apprehensive about the word selfish, but when it comes to caregiving, it's okay to put yourself as a priority, and it's okay to make sure that your needs are being met so that you can be an effective caregiver. So you can take a couple of minutes or a couple seconds and just think real briefly about how you manage your time and your overall needs for yourself as a caregiver, and see which category you might fall into. If you are a totally selfless caregiver, it's possible that you are in this category. It is possible to be a totally selfless caregiver, but if you are, then that means something is being compromised and you're not taking care of yourself, and you might be falling and finding yourself in this caregiver martyr syndrome. So what does that mean? Well, the definition of a martyr is a person who sacrifices something of great value, and especially life itself, for the sake of principle. So if we're looking at what a caregiver martyr syndrome is, it means that you as the caregiver are sacrificing your own care and needs in order to be a caregiver. Now, as a care manager, I often see this because I go into homes of caregivers and their focus is always their loved one. Typically, the population I work with are caregivers for dementia-related care. And so when I'm meeting with them, of course I'm there to help assess the situation and see how we can provide assistance and recommendations for their loved one. But I'm also gauging where the caregiver is, because in my conversations with them, I'm there to help them as well and help them navigate this system. And through our conversations, I often hear caregivers making a note of, well, I do X, Y, and Z, and I'm the only one that can do it. And this is where I start to notice the trends and start to see if somebody is falling into caregiver martyr syndrome, because their thought process is that they're the only ones that can do that. So I see this frequently, and we want to make sure that our primary caregivers are utilizing the support that's around them, because if you get into this mode, there can be consequences of a negative nature, not only to yourself, but to the relationship with the person that you're providing care for, as well as to the relationships you have with the rest of the caregiving crew. So it's imperative that we work with our primary caregivers to avoid this from happening. There are different ways that the martyr syndrome can be manifested. It can come up in any number of facets. It can impact you in your physical manner, your emotional and psychological health, your spiritual or social gatherings, your relationships, and your finances. So when we talk about your physical health, we're referencing, are you missing doctor's appointments? Are you not following through on the recommendations that are being made? Are you not following your own plan of care so that you can be in good health as a caregiver? Emotionally and psychologically, are you finding that you are frustrated, irritated, or resentful, getting aggravated a lot more easily than you used to be? Are you finding that if you have a mental health diagnosis of depression or anxiety, are you having an exacerbation of that? Have you noticed that you are no longer participating in any spiritual or religious traditions or groups that you were previously in? If you're working, how is your social? How are you being impacted socially? Are your relationships at work being affected? Are you not socializing as much as you used to, or participating in groups that you once did participate in? And how is your financial situation being impacted by taking on this role of caregiving? So these are all the different ways that the martyr syndrome can develop or show or manifest itself. So what we'd like to do is have you do an exercise today. It's something a little bit different. And what I want you to do is think about yourself or somebody within the caregiving crew. Now, this exercise is in the book in chapter 7. So if you've read this chapter and you've done this exercise, I would encourage you to do it again, only to see if there's been a change since the last time you did it. And if you haven't done it, you can use it today as a baseline for where you are, and maybe do it again in another 6 months or 3 months and see where you might make some changes if changes are in fact needed. So what we're going to be doing is there's going to be 2 columns on your paper. The next several slides are all going to have words on them. Next to the word will be a letter in parentheses, and those letters stand for the words that you see here. It'll stand for the categories of what we just discussed: financial, fun, mental health, physical health, your relationships, or your spiritual needs. Next to each word, and please put the letter with the parentheses next to the word as well, because we're going to want to look to see how that tallies out. But go ahead and next to each word, make a note of some sort, whether it's a check mark or circle it or put a plus sign. If you're affected by this, if this word resonates with you. If it doesn't, you can leave it blank or put a line through it, however you can to make a notation of this. And then at the end, we're going to run through and see where you stand with things. So we're going to go ahead and get started. Stomach ache. Have you noticed an increase in any stomach aches? Estrangements or tensions in families since caregiving began. And that's the letter R. Unplanned weight change, whether it's a weight gain or a weight loss. Feeling more anxious or restless or nervous than you usually do. Increased use of alcohol or recreational drugs. Increased use of prescription drugs or sleeping aids to help manage your anxiety and get a good night's sleep or get some sleep. Have you noticed an increase in headaches? Any changes in sleeping patterns? Exhaustion or fatigue? Aches or pains? Have there been any flare-ups of any chronic conditions that you might have? Arthritis, back pain? How is your diabetes, if you have diabetes, or blood pressure? How is all of that being managed? Are you having issues in arguing with people, both personally or professionally, if you're still working? Are you seeing a change in your personal relationships? Has there been a change in sexual activity? Are you spending most of your time alone or only with your older loved one who you're caring for or other members of your caregiving crew? Are you unable to relax? Some of these do sound similar, so we asked them a couple of different ways, so that's why. Are you feeling disconnected from your spouse, your partner, a significant other in your life? Has there been an onset or an exacerbation of depression? Do you resent or notice an increase in resentment towards family or friends who aren't caregiving, or how you perceive them to be caregiving? And are you regularly turning down social invitations that you love to accept and have accepted in the past? Are you feeling out of balance? And that can be emotionally, psychologically, even physically to some extent. Are you often upset with other members of the caregiving crew? And that can be for any reason whatsoever. Have you stopped going on vacation during this time frame since you started caregiving? Have there been an increase or flare-ups of a mental health condition other than an anxiety disorder or depression that you've had? Are your eating habits changed? Are you eating more poorly? Have your exercise habits changed so you've stopped exercising the way you used to? Have you stopped participating in hobbies or activities that you've enjoyed doing lately? Are you missing your own doctor's appointments? Are you spending more money on your loved one that your spouse or your partner is comfortable with you spending? Are you missing appointments with your mental health provider or psychotherapist? Are you not taking your medication as directed? Have you changed your work habits, meaning have you left a workplace for caregiving despite the financial ramifications or repercussions to yourself, your family, your partner? Are you borrowing from your retirement to take care of your older loved one? Are you missing religious services? And again, this would be if this was something that was a part of your regular routine in the past. Are you spending more money than you can comfortably afford on items or services for your older loved one? Have you stopped making time for prayer or meditation or yoga? Has there been an increase, or have you had an anger with God? Have you stopped spending time in nature? How many of these items have resonated with you? Not all of them will because of who you are and the habits that you have, but how many of them have resonated with you? I'm going to give you a minute to tally up what you came up with. What we need to notice is if more than 5 of these words struck a chord with you or resonated or you identified with, then that's evidence that you're already experiencing a lot of caregiver stress. If you've checked more than 8 items, then chances are at this point you're on the verge of being in a Martyr syndrome. And if you've hit more than 12 words or 12 of these items resonated with you or triggered something in you, then you are in the throes of this caregiver martyr syndrome. Now, the reason we asked you to write down the letters next to the word, because it can help you to see where you're being impacted the most. Everybody has their, if you're a caregiver martyr, you're suffering with caregiver martyr syndrome, then it's going to impact you in varying ways. So that's why we wanted you to write this down. Because if you scored a 12 out of 12 on the physical health, then that's a serious indicator that you're not taking care of yourself from a physical standpoint. You know, whether it's not going to your doctor's appointments, not following through on recommendations. And this can have big consequences as a caregiver, not just to you, but to the person that you're caring for as well. Likewise, it allows you to see where you can start to focus on turning the tables and trying to remedy the situation and help yourself. Oftentimes when we do exercises like this, it isn't until we see this in black and white in front of us that we really understand the significance of the impact that it's having. A lot of times we have these ideas and we talk about it, but when it's in front of us, it's hard to deny it. When, again, as a care manager, when I'm talking to clients and we're going through any list of things and they start talking, one of the things that I ask them to do is to write it down, because as they're writing it down, that visual aid makes it real. It turns it from an idea into something concrete so that you can look at it and you can identify it, and now you know how to move on and work to resolve it. So I would encourage you to hold on to this, because now you have a starting point and a springboard for which we can work to turn things around for either you or someone in your caregiving crew. And that's critical to improving your own state of being. So just a quick poll. We're going to see how many of you registered. We have the poll up. And what I'd like you to do, and this is of course all anonymous, but let's see how you guys made out. Who is in Martyr syndrome? Is it me, one of my caregiving crewmates, nobody yet, but I or someone else is very close, or nobody, we're doing pretty well? So go ahead and take a minute just to fill that out if you don't mind. and we can see how it tallies up. Okay, so it looks like we've got people, we have 17% coming in at me. We have nobody coming in at one of my caregiving crewmates. The highest percentage we have is nobody yet, but I think I or someone else is close, and that's coming in at 67%. And at 17%, we have nobody. We're doing pretty well. So what's great is that, you know, if you're on the verge, you're starting to recognize it, whether it's in yourself or somebody else. And that can really turn the table for you and the rest of your crew, as well as the person that you're caring for. So, you know, congratulate yourself on recognizing it, because that's the first step in this process to remedy it. So I want to go ahead and just take another minute to thank our sponsors, Hilarity for Charity and Oasis Senior Advisors. Of course, again, if you haven't visited their website, I would encourage you to do so. It's always a great opportunity to get familiar and get acquainted with what's available for yourselves as caregivers. I want to go ahead and, while we have them with us, again, I want to take a minute to introduce Tim Ivankovich. He is Oasis Senior Advisor and CEO of Oasis Senior Advisor. So thank you, Tim, for joining us today. And I guess I just want to touch base, especially about this particular topic. As senior advisors, I imagine that this is something that your advisors often run into when meeting with caregivers, because caregivers are so used to taking on all of the responsibility, and having them feel like they can trust another person to do that is really challenging. Do you find that often?
We do, and that's certainly more of the case than the exception, where you know, caregivers don't realize the burden that they're under sometimes. And this exercise stuff that you went through, I think, is fabulous, and I'd love to get a copy of it for my advisors just to share.
Sure.
When you're in the middle of the throes of caregiving, you don't realize all the changes that are happening to you physically until you sit back and take a look at what it was like prior and now how it is now. So I love this exercise, and yeah, our advisors see this extensively, of the care
Sure.
caregiver has to give on a regular basis. So yeah, this would be great for us to get more in tune to help them identify the challenges and that martyrism that they're seeing.
Right, thank you. Yeah, and anybody can get this on the website through the book, and it gives you the opportunity to make copies for yourself. That's not a problem. But it is a great tool, and thank you for sharing that, because oftentimes people that are in advisory roles are coming into a situation where they have to sometimes confront that person where they are and challenge them a little bit to be able to release that and help point out where they are with their caregiving stress. So
Exactly. And thanks also, Steph, for your presentation today. Wonderful and great to be a part of this group with Hilarity for Charity and JoJo and her group. So this is awesome, and I hope people are getting a lot of good benefit from this.
Thank you, and I appreciate that. I appreciate your time today and your ongoing support and sponsorship as well. Thank you.
Our pleasure.
Okay, great. And also joining us today is JoJo Drake, the Communications and Program Manager for Hilarity for Charity. JoJo, thank you also for joining us today. I appreciate it. And as one of your programs and your initiatives is to help caregivers by providing assistance to them in their home. So I'm wondering also if this is something that is a struggle for some caregivers to actually take that much needed break that they deserve now that you're giving them the opportunity to do so?
Yeah, actually, it's really poignant that you asked that. And first of all, thank you for what you do and for these book clubs and everyone for joining us today. And for all the caregivers out there, you guys are the real unsung heroes. We have found that oftentimes with this relief, people are so just unencumbered, and it's like liberating, but they're so used to like their identity at that point is like being the sole caregiver for that loved one, even though there should be a caregiver crew. And we do find a little bit of that people are like, what do I do with my time now? Or oftentimes what they want to do with their time is like more mundane things that we all take for granted. I'm personally not a caregiver, going to doctor's appointments, writing in a journal. And so these things are tricky. And I think all these resources you've touched on of just even writing it down or entertaining the thought helps people work through these things. Sometimes you're not even aware, right, that you might be in this space or nearing that space, broaching that martyr syndrome space. And I think to help with that is saying it out loud, whether writing it down, or we also offer online support groups. So perhaps you're not in a place where you're ready for relief or need relief, or you have assistance from other caregivers, but you need help navigating out of that martyr syndrome, or just hearing from others who are in this right now, just as you, an Alzheimer's caregiver. So we encourage you to head to our website, hilarityforcharity.org, and look into our online support groups as well, so that you can touch on things like martyr syndrome and just hear from others who are experiencing exactly what you're experiencing right now.
Great. Thank you so much, JoJo, and thank you for taking the time to offer up different resources and opportunities for Hilarity for Charity, and we appreciate the time you've afforded us today as well.
Yeah, of course. Thank you, guys.
All right. And again, if you haven't visited either of those websites, please take a moment to go ahead and do so. They're invaluable, with tons of resources and opportunities to add into your support network. So now that you've done this exercise, and even if you're not at the point where you're involved or you're in the full throes of being in martyr syndrome, which is a good thing. It's good that you're recognizing it. How do you course correct? What can you do to either prevent from going overboard and to remedy the situation? What are some things that we can do? If you're finding yourself in martyr syndrome, one of the most important things that you can do is to acknowledge it to your crew. It's extremely important to recognize and understand that that team and that crew is there to support you. They're on your side. And oftentimes acknowledging it is the pivotal moment. And when you do that, you're opening yourself up to other opportunities and allowing other people in to help. So acknowledging it is first and foremost. And that's not always easy to do. And sometimes it takes, you know, doing an exercise like this or reaching out to a different resource to find that out. The next thing you can do is you want to commit to pull out of one thing immediately or change one thing immediately. Now, this is where that list and those words and those phrases all can come in really handy. If there's one area that just stands out to you as needing immediate change or immediate attention, that's where you want to put your focus. If you haven't been to the doctors, if you haven't followed up on your own medical care needs, that's something to do right away. Or if it's not, if it's something where, you know, from a more social perspective or a spiritual perspective, figure out, see where you can make that immediate change. And sometimes just acknowledging it is the beginning of that change. So see if there is one area that you're comfortable with pulling out of and letting go of and changing. As JoJo alluded, you want to reach out and connect with an organization who can help you. Right now, and more than ever, we're so fortunate to have so many opportunities becoming available to you as caregivers, to our crews, to the community at large. And this is because so many people are recognizing the need for caregiver support. You cannot do it alone. So there are now so many opportunities for people to help you navigate this and figure it out. If you're comfortable with having an aging life care manager or a geriatric care manager is what they're formally known as, you know, this is somebody that can come in and help weed through what you need to do, what you don't need to do, and where you can focus allowing other people to come in. If that's not as comfortable for you, is there a group that you can join where other people are going through this, that you can talk with them about strategies that have worked for them? The area on aging is always an opportunity, and that's all over the country in every state and every county where there's that resource. And these are professionals that can also keep you informed, come out and do an assessment, see what could benefit you. So it's reaching out and connecting. Caregiving can be a very isolating experience, especially if you are in this martyr syndrome. The idea when you're in this martyr syndrome is that you're the only one that can do it. The people that are part of your crew, maybe they're not helping you the way that you want them to be helping you, or in the way that you thought they would be helping you. And so it can be very isolating. So if you recognize that this is where you are, connecting with another group or an organization or a professional that can help you can be critical in starting to remedy and turn this situation around for yourself. Lastly, or one of the last things I always recommend, and I tell this to my caregivers all the time, give yourself permission to be an imperfect caregiver. We're human beings. You're human beings. Humans taking care of humans are going to have flaws. It's just the nature of being human. Nobody is perfect. And so allow yourself that opportunity to breathe. Allow yourself to make what you perceive as an error. I also want to say, give yourself permission to take a break. That's one of the biggest and hardest things I see for caregivers, is to take that time out, that break for themselves, to prioritize themselves. But it is critical, especially in wanting to be the most effective caregiver you can be. You cannot take care of somebody else if you are not taking care of yourself. And the way it impacts your relationship with your loved one and with the rest of the caregiving crew can be really detrimental. So give yourself permission to take a break. Give yourself permission to be an imperfect caregiver, because there are no perfect caregivers, and that's okay. So based on the poll, it seems like some of you also feel that somebody else might be close to being in this martyr syndrome. If that's the case, there are some recommendations that we can make for you as well. One of them is to ask what happens. In this particular case, the example up here says if they're in the hospital for a week. What that really means is, what is plan B? Oftentimes, somebody that is in caregiver martyr mode is not really planning, because they're assuming everything is going to be fine. And they also don't think anybody else can take care of the person to the same degree. And I can give you a personal example from myself. My father was being cared for by my mom. My sister and I both live out of state. We were constantly asking my mom, what happens if something happens to you? And we were often met with, well, I'm healthy, nothing's wrong, everything is fine. And to her credit, she was and is a very healthy individual, has no medication, good health, great genes. It's wonderful for her. But accidents happen. People fall. You never know. She was working at the time, so what if she got stuck at somebody's house and she couldn't get home? What was the plan? And she really didn't want to have a plan in place. So it was through a lot of persistence and a lot of encouragement and support that we said, you know, it's not that we think something's going to happen, or it's not that, you know, we want something to happen, but isn't it in Dad's best interest to have a plan B should the need arise? And so turning it to make sure and have them see it as coverage for your loved one is a way to approach it. Because again, oftentimes when you're asking pointed questions with specifics, it forces that conversation and that dialogue to happen. Now, sometimes those who are in true martyr syndrome or mode might say there is nobody else. And in the Cruising Through Caregiving book, there are some exercises in chapter 7 that are reviewed. And one of them is to help families just keep asking. Ask them to write down any names that they have of somebody that can help. Eventually, hopefully, somebody will come into their mind that they can put down. But it's super critical for there to be a backup plan. Keep in mind that you want to also be offering help that is realistic for you to offer and that they will accept. So your support to them might not be doing direct care for the person providing care, but maybe it's ancillary care or grocery shopping. Maybe it's keeping up with the yard or going through a whole pile of mail because it's just building up and building up and building up. What are some of your strengths as part of the crew? And where do you see yourself being most helpful? And it can be small things because, to be honest with you, caregivers have so much going on that it's sometimes those things that they're not even thinking about, those small things that get lost in the shuffle that could be helpful, like maybe doing some laundry or emptying the dishwasher or, having groceries delivered. So make it realistic. And as they start to hopefully accept this, you can build up to what other things they'll allow you to help with. I always tell people too that it's okay to be persistent and point out specific observations, especially if you've seen a dramatic change in somebody. If somebody was really active and they were walking every morning, and then you gradually notice that you're not seeing them out and about or walking in the neighborhood, you can gently ask them, I noticed you haven't been walking. Or if somebody has stopped going to either church or temple or synagogue, checking in with them to see if they're okay. It could be something really, less dramatic. Perhaps they always had their nails done, or they had manicures and pedicures done once a month, and you notice that their nails haven't been done, or that their hair hasn't been set or taken care of in the way that they're used to. Ask about that. If they haven't been out, or if their lawn is not being kept up and they were a fastidious gardener, point it out. Again, when caregivers are in the throes of this, and Tim pointed it out, it's hard to see all that's changing with what's going on. So when somebody asks that or points it out, you might not even be aware that it's been a month since you got your nails done, because when you're involved and you're so engrossed in it, you're not even paying attention. So point those things out, because by doing so, you can help that person to recognize where they might be and how to move on. And as I've said from the beginning of this part, be persistent, be consistent, be supportive. It's not easy because people who are in the throes of being in martyr syndrome don't always hear what's being said, don't want to hear what's being said. Sometimes it's helpful to bring in a third party or an authority figure if there's a physician of the person they're caring for, if it's their own physician or a person of clergy that they really respect or look up to. Maybe that person coming in can help point out and introduce some of the concerns that you're seeing or some of the issues that are arising as a result of this. Again, it's that third party sometimes that can offer that objectivity to them that somebody else who's much closer to the situation can't. So don't hesitate to bring that in on any level if you think it could be helpful. At the end of the day, when we're talking about somebody who really is in the throes of being in a martyr syndrome, they're not always going to hear what you're saying. And if they do, they're not going to want to accept it necessarily. And so at a certain point, there might not be something that you can do to change that. But it becomes really critical at this point that you are involved in paying attention, because when somebody is the one and only, there can be an unintentional abuse or neglect. And that's something that should never be taking place. And this is where those detrimental or grave consequences can come from somebody that is so engrossed and in the throes of a significant caregiver martyr syndrome. And if you do have concerns, you do have the opportunity to reach out to your local adult protective services, or there's on this screen is the National Adult Protective Services Association. People get really apprehensive when you start saying words like adult protective services. It's been my experience that bringing in adult protective services is actually really helpful. They're meant to be a resource, they're meant to be a support, and that's something that shouldn't be minimized. The connotation isn't always there, but it's important to recognize that adult protective services can be a huge asset in these situations to help alleviate what's going on. Because what we don't want is for the person that's being cared for to be hurt in any way. And again, we're not saying that if somebody is in this martyr syndrome, if there is abuse and neglect, that it's being done with any intent. Usually it's the exact opposite. But as we've said, there's only so much that one person can do. We've talked about this throughout the entire series and in the book, that caregiving is not for one person. You need a crew, you need a team. It's too consuming in every capacity, and we need to be able to put ourselves into the equation. We need to make time for ourselves and prioritize ourselves to be an effective and positive caregiver. We've talked about the fact that caregiving is a 24/7 job, and it is imperative to take care of yourself. If you have found yourself in this martyr syndrome, please take a minute to try to acknowledge it and make time to do something kind for yourself. Make time to do something that you most certainly deserve in every aspect of your life. It will go a long way to improving your quality of life, the person's quality of life that you're caring for, as well as the rest of your caregiving crew. I again want to take this opportunity to thank our sponsors, Hilarity for Charity, for having Jojo Drake here today, Oasis Senior Advisors with Tim Ivankovich. We're so grateful for their ongoing support and their initiatives to helping caregivers in the community. We're grateful to have you guys participating as our audience today. So thank you so much for the time that you've afforded me. And I'm going to turn it back over to Darlene now.